Thank you, Ian. Can you hear me in the back? Yeah, good, good. So, welcome everyone. So as Rian said, my name is Robin, and I live in Thailand, originally from the US, and been through a long meandering journey through this lifetime. Various continents. I was in England for a long time, but for the last now 16 years I've been in Thailand, and as Rian said, I was a monk for a fairly long time with the Ajahn Chah tradition, and started in England and then came to Thailand and then went back to England. And finally, in around 2007, I stepped out of the monastic life, not quite jumped over the cloister wall, but for various reasons decided it was better for me to practice as a layman. And when I had the good fortune, as a monk, I had already started doing some translation. I had lived in Thailand for, I think it was 8 years as a monk, and learned Thai and started doing translation work. And so when I disrobed, someone offered me a job. Imagine that. I really didn't know what I was going to do. So, and that's what I've been doing for the last 15 plus years. In particular, a book by a very respected monk in Thailand. He's now about 88. He's still alive and still writing. His name is Payutto, or Prat Payutto, or the Thais know him as Somdet Payutto. And he wrote a book called Buddha Dhamma, which is a compendium of Theravada Buddhism. And now, before I start talking more, I'd like to know, is there anyone here who is new to Buddhism altogether? Okay. Well, that's good to know. So, obviously we all have different degrees of familiarity with the language and the teachings, and in particular the language. So you might know that in Theravada Buddhism, or what's sometimes called the Southern School, the Buddhism you find in Thailand, in Burma, and Sri Lanka, Laos, Cambodia, these teachings were passed down using a language called Pali, which is a cousin language to Sanskrit. So I believe that anyone who's doing a deeper dive into the Buddhist teachings, you'll eventually come across Pali terminology, and even if you read, say, English language Dharma books or Dhamma books, this is an example where, as I said, Pali and Sanskrit are very close relatives, and so there are many words in English that have been adopted, and frequently they're the Sanskrit version. So the word Dharma is the Sanskrit. In Pali it's Dhamma. Another example is karma is Sanskrit, kamma is Pali, nirvana is Sanskrit, nibbana is Pali. So these are just examples. And for the sake of communication, we rely on language. I can't use telepathy and fortunately we can't just, scan our knowledge. I don't think that'll ever happen. I think we can maybe do payments at 7-Eleven, but probably not transmit knowledge. I think that's always going to, we're always going to rely on this kind of forum where through speech and especially in these live gatherings. So, as is usually the case, I come perhaps twice a year. I live in Nakhon Pathom, so it's a neighboring province, and come and participate in these gatherings, maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Lead a session, and usually, those of you who've attended my talks in the past, you might remember that it's usually just something that I'm working on. And today's is no exception. That I'm kind of retired now, but I still have various little projects, things on the back burner, or things that I promised to do before I retired that I sort of have to keep my word, and so there was a pause in that work because the big project I'm part of is the Thai government is sponsoring a translation of the entire Tripitaka, or also known as the Pali Canon. You could say the sacred texts of Theravada Buddhism from Pali into English. So they have hired translators from around the world to do individual volumes. Now, depending on which collection of the Pali Canon you work with, like in Thailand, if you go to any monastery, you'll see a big book shelf, usually very elaborate, glass, often locked, and sometimes with ornate mother of pearl inlay, and in there are these 45. So the Pali Canon is in the Thai tradition or in Thai culture is a 45-volume set. And so 2 of those are what are called the Jataka tales, or the verses that are connected to the Jataka tales, which are the previous life stories of the Buddha. And there are, I think, 547, something like that. And I'm an editor. So I've been waiting for about 6 months now for work to edit, and nothing's been in my inbox. So the translator, who happens to be Spanish, is, I think he has a lot on his plate. And at first I was frustrated because I wanted to get things done. And I thought, well, actually, this is quite nice. I have nothing to do. And so there are projects that I've wanted to do in a sense, for myself or independently. And one of them was to go back. The Buddha Dhamma was completed in 2017. It was a really big project. It took me about 15 years. And it's a 1,500-page book, so quite a big book. So I'd always wanted to go back and read through it again and see if I can polish it up and work on, sort of look at it with a new set of eyes. And that's what I've been doing. So I opened up chapter 1, and chapter 1 is on the 5 aggregates. So I've been working on that for the last 2 months or so, and so I thought it's perhaps not a theme I otherwise would have chosen because it's quite challenging. And I think as to set the bar very low for tonight, if I don't bore you to death, then I've already succeeded. I mean, that's an exaggeration, but it is you could say it's a fundamental teaching. If you read through the Pali Canon, you'll come across the 5 aggregates, or in Pali they're called the khandas, again and again. But they're usually taught in relation to, say, some other teaching, integrated somehow. But in this the English version of Buddha Dhamma, there's 19 chapters. In the first chapter, Prapayutta has chosen the the 5 aggregates, the 5 khandas, as chapter 1. And the reason being is, like the heading is like, what constitutes human life? Like, what makes up a human being? And so these 5 aggregates are everything. They encompass our whole life. Now, again, it might be helpful. Is there anyone here who's never heard of the 5 aggregates or the 5 khandas? Don't be shy. It's helpful for me because, thank you. And so here's an example of how are we going to translate this word khanda into English. Now, I wouldn't use the word aggregate probably ever. I think, don't you like road surfaces? Isn't that like aggregate? Basically, I don't even know what aggregate means, but I do roughly know it means, because the word khanda, it's not a very exciting word, and it's the title of today's talk, where I said the 5 limbs of human, or boughs, like of a tree, is accurate. It's one of the translations or one of the meanings of this word khanda, but it can also just mean a heap, a mass, and those are just not very, sexy words, like the 5 heaps. You probably wouldn't have come, I'm going to talk about the 5 heaps. But as I said, this word khanda, or in Sanskrit, it's with an S, skanda, and I mention that because one of my main interests is language, and how you might know that Sanskrit and Pali is an Indo-European language. So many of the words that at first may appear really foreign and strange, we have, are very, very closely related to, say, European languages. One example is like if you give, say, a meal offering to the monks, we would use the word dana, or just an act of generosity can be dana. So if you speak in English, we have the word donation. It's the same root. In French, donner, to give. So once, for me anyways, once I was made aware of this, just partly it's all the sense that our ancestors, going back 5,000, 8,000 years, were, some of them anyways, were these basically nomads, herding cattle and sheep and I don't know what else, pigs. Do you herd pigs? And so a lot of these words, like the word cow in German, it's Kuh. If you go to India, it's go. And many of these words, because Thai language is primarily, as far as I know, is more closely related to Chinese, in that it's tonal, it's monosyllabic, but probably close to half of the Thai language are words that have been adopted or have come from India through this exchange of the last 2,000 years, where Buddhism was introduced, and then also Hinduism. Some of you may have been to Sukhothai or Lopburi, and there's a lot of architecture. There was a lot of Buddhism and Hinduism are also, just like Pali, Sanskrit, are closely related. And sometimes in the same monastery or the same temple, you'll have the Buddha, and then you'll have Ganesh or Vishnu, or it's not seen as a problem. There's kind of like a you probably all know there is a Buddhist cosmology. So for traditional Buddhists, or I would say, you could say even like, for me, I've never had a problem with the. Are you getting an echo? No. So that the idea that there are other realms of existence, there are devas, there are these celestial beings, or there may be ghosts. I think Thai people are more fascinated by ghosts, I think, than, say, Americans. Most Thais, if you say, okay, you go and sleep in this abandoned house, no way. And so with language, so going back to this word kanda, skanda, it's related to the English word, probably not. It's debatable, but the word shoulder, because that's just sort of the mass, the human body, and the back. Say the back of an elephant was kanda. So that's just one example. So again, in one of my previous talks, maybe a year ago or so, I talked about the Abhidhamma, which is one of the three baskets. The word Tripitaka means three baskets. So you have the Vinaya, which is, say, the monastic discipline. You have the suttas, or the Suttanta, which are what most of us are familiar with. Those are the formal teachings or sermons by the Buddha. And then you have the Abhidhamma, which is more sometimes it's called Buddhist psychology. It's somewhat more abstract. And it doesn't refer to individuals or people's names. It's really like maybe a closer examination of how the mind works. And so in one of these talks, I talked about the Abhidhamma. And in that talk, and this is a theme that I have often repeated, is like basically the universe in its entirety is made up of mind and body, of mind and matter. And now this is I'm going to use a word I've always wanted to use, which is predicate. I remember in college studying philosophy, the professor used predicate, because basically any philosophical argument, but you could say even religious tradition, you need a starting point. And in a way, okay, let's agree to this. Because if we don't, if everything is up for debate from the word go, it can be quite confusing. And the same, I would argue, is like, okay, we want to study Buddhism. How do we begin? And this may sound really basic, but I think, especially like for me, having grown up in a Western culture, there's still a lot of confusion about, say, I'll give you an example, the nature of consciousness. I mean, it seems so basic. So, yeah, of course we're conscious. Like, duh, kind of thing. But then there are people who argue, no, consciousness is an emanation of matter. It can get very complex, very confusing quite quickly. And this is why I say predicate, where you make a statement, okay, whether you disagree with it or not, we can just set it aside. Let's just agree. And some of you will say, yeah, well, that just makes perfect sense. There's materiality, or what we call physics, and then there's mentality. And mentality is everything to do with the mind. So we have the body and the mind. Now, I'm not a major in philosophy, so I can't talk to you about Isaac Newton. All I know is an apple fell on his head. But I think he really struggled over this, or maybe it didn't. Maybe he fell on the apple. But I think it was him, but certainly other philosophers is mind the same as matter? Are they completely different? And so it can get confusing. But in the Buddhist teachings, it's not seen really as that complex or problematic. Like these are two aspects of reality, and for certain purposes they can be distinguished, mind and matter, mind and body, but at other times they're seen as interdependent. And I think everyone here would agree that very, very like simple examples, if, say, we feel a very strong emotion, say anxiety, fear, remorse, there's a very tangible, in fact, the word emotion, I would say, always implies a feeling tone to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't call it an emotion. Like a thought, okay, I'm thinking of a cat. Doesn't, I might like cats or dislike cats, but the word cat is sort of is just a word. But if and I could say the same about sadness. If I use the word sadness, it could be just an abstract term. But if everyone here at some point in their life has experienced sadness, I assume, and that is then you can really go into the body and where does sadness abide? Because otherwise it is just abstract. And that's just a simple example of this interdependency between mind and matter. And the reverse is true, so that, say we eat something and we have gas or a stomach ache, then that will often have an effect on our mind. Even though it's physical, we might start worrying, we might start complaining, whatever. And there's another example. So this is directly related to the five khandhas, because the five khandhas are, here we're focusing on the human being, not, say, the cosmos, not stars and black holes and plastic, just material things, which is all a valid, if you're an engineer, like these cranes that they put on top of these high-rise, that follows laws of physics. You need to be able to really apply your understanding of physics, of matter, to know if the wind blows, if how does metal bend or whatever. But here we're talking about, okay, so that's the universe, that with the exception of nirvana or nibbana, which is the transcendent, that which goes beyond nama rupa or mind and body. It's everything. So before I talk about the human being, everything, whether it's mind or matter, is subject to what's called the three characteristics. So impermanence, which is anicca, dukkha, which is, say, stress or pressure, that in a sense, if you take the example of glass, now in other contexts, dukkha is called suffering, but in the three characteristics, we use the word dukkha. This glass is not suffering. It doesn't care whether my talk is boring or exciting. It doesn't even care if I drop it on the floor. It's not going to scream. It doesn't suffer. But it's subject to dukkha in the sense that all the little molecules, atoms that are zipping around, the electrons, they all sort of want to go their own way. And eventually this glass is going to break. So if you think about it, it's very closely related to anicca and impermanence. And then the third characteristic is not self, anatta. And that means that, like, we call it a glass. Like for now, there's a harmony here. It's coalesced. It's all these little particles are sort of in agreement. But there's nothing there that's really, one could call an essence of the glass that will last forever. And that becomes particularly challenging, of course, when we focus on ourselves, because the experience we have is I. I do this, I feel that, I achieve this. And that is, you could say, part of the human dilemma, or the part of the human, we all have to work with that, or in a sense come to terms with that, or come to peace with that, that, again, the Buddhism's not one of like, you have to believe this, but what the Buddha taught was there's no soul. There's nothing that will last forever that we're carrying around, that we somehow, some people are eternalists, so they believe that there's a soul that lasts forever. Maybe like in a Christian tradition where I grew up, I think God took a bit of clay or something. This is Robin, Robin, and now Robin is going to last through eternity, and maybe this body will die, but somehow my soul will exist forever. Some people will be more of the annihilationist thinking that, well, yeah, I don't last forever. Lights out, it's all going to kind of be extinguished when I die. But for while I'm alive, yeah, there's a self. And, you can offend me, I can be disappointed, whatever. I can suffer because there's this I. And so this, as I said, the 5 khandhas are usually discussed in relation to other teachings. And this is an example of, say, the 3 characteristics. Now, before I list these 5, for those of you who are not familiar with them, again, we're bringing the focus now on, say, the human beings, and not on material things, on human beings. And what I said earlier about how this is a challenging talk, it's partly because these 5, for one reason, there is no equivalent teaching, as far as I know, in any Western philosophical or religious tradition of the 5 khandhas. So it's something that's unusual. In fact, when I looked, say, in the Pali Sanskrit dictionaries, I don't think this teaching existed at the time of the Buddha. Of course, the Buddha had to use the language he had at hand, and there was a very rich Brahmanistic tradition. There was a lot of religious seekers, and there was quite a elaborate and detailed language to discuss, say, human existence and what is the meaning of life. So the Buddha, I would say 97% of the time, just adopted language and used the words as they were understood. Now, sometimes he would take a word and say, he tweaked the meaning. So that was convenient. He didn't have to come up with a new word, but he said, actually, like, say, the word Brahmin. You might know that the caste system was very, very strictly observed at the time of the Buddha, where they had the Brahma, I guess they weren't called Hindus then, but it's sort of Hinduism is the heir. There's a lineage that goes from Brahmanism to Hinduism. Is more or less the same thing in my view. And so if you were born into a Brahmin caste, you felt superior because there's actually even a belief, I think, that Brahma, which is the greatest, the kind of the highest god in the pantheon, that Brahmins sort of were Brahma kind of like took pieces of his head or something. Those were the Brahmins, like, and then the manual labors, is from his arms, because they had to be strong, and then I think they were even like the untouchables, or sort of like the soles of the feet. There's this idea of, and so he said, nah, that's not actually, that doesn't really accord with reality. I mean, it's a narrative, and there's a whole religious tradition that's been woven out of this narrative and is very prevalent. And the Buddha, when he appeared and started teaching about this, he was very threatening to that structure, that societal structure. And so he said, actually the word Brahmin is someone who's excellent, not by way of birth, but by way of their goodness, by way of their virtue, by way of that, in a sense, we can become a Brahmin in this lifetime by practicing a wholesome course, by being virtuous. So that's an example where he took a word and he tweaked it. And then occasionally, and there are very few of these words, where he seemed to just, because language is really just a, you have prefixes and suffixes, and you can kind of like, it's a little bit like Lego, especially if you speak German. You have the Verschlags, Mittlung, Gescheit, that's just an imaginary word, but I'm just like drawing upon various words. You just stick them together and you can say, okay, this is a word to designate a new concept. So he sometimes did that, but it was rare. Okay, so you have this word khanda, which really just means like a collection. So there are these 5 parts, to put it in very simple terms. And as I said, these 5 are, you could say, under this larger umbrella of nama rupa. Nama is related to things where name, and that's one word for the mind. So nama dhamma is a mentality or a mental phenomenon. And then you have rupa, which is body, corporeality, or matter. And so these 5 are, so you have these 2, mind and body, and then for the human existence, or these human beings, the rupa just stays rupa, and that rather that being matter, it's the body. So if you think about this, the flesh and blood and the skeleton and all the rest of it, but it's if any of you are doctors or surgeons, you've seen it more close up, but we all know what bodies are. But with the mind, it's divided into 4 factors. If you can bear that in mind, it's just that in one sense it's not that complex. But on the other hand, it is rather complex, especially when you go into the nature of the mind. And that some of you maybe are familiar with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, the Satipatthana. So this is a very, you could say, a key or meditation in Buddhism of where to focus, where you can focus your attention. You can actually be with these 4 foundations, and so you have Rupa, Vedana, Citta, and Dhamma. So Rupa, body. So we can be with, we can contemplate the various organs. We can think about the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, and air, and how they manifest in these bodies. We can practice anapanasati, in and out breathing. These are meditations that have to do with the body, with rupa. And then you have Vedana, which is feeling or sensation. Not feeling as an emotion, but just every time there is sense contact, which is innumerable amounts, uncountable, but amounts of time every day, that there's like a flavor to it, there's a tone to it, that sensation, and that can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and that can be a meditation. So then we can observe, like, just from as the day or as a moment to moment, is there pleasure, is there pain, or is there a neutral sensation? And that's Vedana. Jitta is, in this context, the word jitta is pretty tricky, and I'll be talking about jitta more. Jitta can sometimes mean the mind, just the mind. Like I would say it can be used validly for these four mental factors, like it's the mind or the heart, however you, sometimes depending on the context, I think mind is the way I use it, or I'm used to it being used, is more cognitive, maybe the thinking process, reflective, and heart is more the feeling, the emotions. But they're all part of the mind. And then you have the Dhamma, Sir Dhamma. Again, it's Buddhism, this is why it can be difficult to be a student of Buddhism, because just the nature of language, like Dhamma, as you might know, this is the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. It means the truth. It can mean nature. It can mean the Buddha's teachings. Here it just means basically a thought. Like you have the mind, and then you have what appears in the mind as, and so Jitta, I would say, is more like the mental state. Which I would associate more with emotion. Like, are you feeling peaceful? Are you feeling agitated? And emotions, in my experience, they last for a period of time, usually minutes, hours, days. Hopefully not. I mean, unless it's bliss. I think the Buddha experienced 6 weeks of bliss after his awakening. That's not bad. But hopefully, I mean. The things like depression that can last for weeks or months, and that's not a very healthy place to be in. But the Dhammas are more like, I would say, like almost like embers. They're very hard. Like a thought is actually very hard. Like how many of us can observe the arising of a thought? Like, where does it come from? And then before you know it, it's led, it's like we call it a train of thought. It's led to another thought and then another thought. And it's so rapid, it's actually very difficult to be aware, to be mindful. But that's a meditation. So why isn't it the 5 foundations? Why isn't it the 5 khandhas? The reason being is because these 4 mental factors are intertwined, and one can separate them. Obviously, there's a distinction made between these 4, but in terms of practical, say, I say we use the word meditation. I'm not just talking about sitting cross-legged, closing your eyes, and being concentrated, but actually, whether it's meditation can also be very reflective, we're analytical, where we examine, we investigate. That's also meditation. That is not always easy to be able to distinguish between these 4, and I'll just list them quickly. So you have rupa, which is the body, and then you have these 4 mental factors, and the first one is vedana, or feeling, sensation, and the second is sanya, or perception, and that's the recognition, where, like I see this, and there's the word brown. I recognize this as brown. It doesn't. That's it. Just brown. Chair, clock, and we have like agreed upon words, like in a language. If you were to say, "Oh, no, it's a dog," then we get into an argument. No, it's not a dog, it's a clock. But everyone here, everyone agree? Clock? Okay, good. So that's perception. It's just the recognition, identification of the object that's in attention. It can be a person, like Andy. Okay, I see Andy. I remember that person's name is Andy. And that is sanya, that's perception. Now, I also remember a few years ago, Andy told me about he was going to Scotland, where he no longer is. And that's not perception anymore. That is the next factor, which is called sankhara, or a mental formation. That's a story. That is, sankhara is, say, the whole, is gamut the right word? The whole kind of thoughts, feelings, likes and dislikes, both positive and negative aspects of the mind. A sanya is not, you can't say it doesn't really have, it doesn't have any moral dimension to it. Even if you want to call this a dog, that's not immoral of you. It's just, you know, maybe a little confused. But if, say, I like this clock, and maybe Best won't notice if I put it in my pocket and take it home, that's a moral issue then. And so the next factor is sankhara, and then the final one is vijnana, which is usually translated, almost invariably translated as consciousness. So these four factors, vedana, and to make these words, like, is there anyone here who's never heard of the word vedana? You've all heard of the word vedana? I'm surprised. Okay. Sanya. Anyone here who's never heard of the word sanya? Okay. Sankhara. Okay. Vijnana. Okay. So to make these words a little bit more accessible, again, my pet project of etymology, vedana. This comes from, we call it a root or stem, which is related to the English word wisdom. So it's a form, it's already a, vedana is not really a form of knowledge, but because it's an aspect of the mind, you could say it's related, it's closely associated to knowledge, or it leads to knowledge. Anyway, this word vedana is usually translated as feeling or sensation. And again, it's pretty simple. The most simple classification, as I mentioned, is into three: pleasure, pain, neutral feeling. And then the next one is sanya, and then you have the nya in sanya and the nya in vijnana. And I don't know if many of you probably know the Pali word for wisdom, which is panya, is also nya. That's related to the English word knowledge. So you have these words in these five khandas that are directly related to the English word wisdom, the English word knowledge. So I'm just putting that out there. These are not totally strange words from the other side of the world. And, you know, it's like if I were to learn Arabic, it'd be hard going for me, because there's not many similarities. I mean, it might be very useful to learn Arabic, and if I were to decide to move to Saudi Arabia, I would learn Arabic because I want to communicate. But so so you have these, and I'm also saying this because I want to start using the Pali words with you this evening. Because if I say feeling, I mean, that's confusing, because most of the time when we use my feelings are hurt, we're talking about emotions, and that is a sankhara. That's a mental formation or a volitional formation. There are, according to the Abhidhamma, 50 kinds of sankhara, but there's many more. I think it's just like the Abhidhamma, they like to classify and organize, and so you have anger, you have confusion, you have loving kindness, you have equanimity. These are all sankharas, mental formations or volitional formations. And the reason they're called volitional formations is because one of them is called cetana, which is intention. And intention, in a sense, is always the vanguard. It's always what initiates these other sankharas to constellate and to be expressed. Cetana or intention is often synonymous with karma, because karma is an intentional action. It's a volitional action. It's something we choose. And so these are the 5 khandas. These the rupa, the body, and then the vedana, feeling, sanya, perception, sankhara, which sometimes some people use formation. And actually, again, I was talking about how confusing it can be because of language. These words are used in different contexts. So again, this glass is also a sankhara. It's a conditioned phenomenon. It's made up, it's formed, it's constructed by, say in this case, by these different atoms, molecules, and so this is a sankhara. But in the context of the 5 khandas, or the 5 aggregates, sankhara has to do with the mind. So it has to do with mental formations, mental constructs. And then you have vijnana, which is consciousness. Now, thinking about these 4, let's leave the body for now, because the body, the body's not that hard to recognize. We have diet, we have sleep, we have various things we have to look at the body. So let's, for now, focus on these 4 mental factors, because in a sense they are really, Buddhism, as you all know, probably, the aim of Buddhism is to bring about the end of suffering, human suffering, and this is dukkha in the heart. This is not dukkha in the world of matter. It's that it's the word suffering, I think, is a really good translation for dukkha in this context. I think suffering, literally from the Latin, it means like you have to carry something around. It's a burden, and that's what suffering is. It's burdensome. I think if again, I've never met anyone that doesn't suffer, so I don't think I have to say to you, for those of you who never suffer, ignore my words now, it probably doesn't apply to you. I think we all know what suffering is, and we all have our own experience of suffering. It comes in many different forms, and so that Buddhism is a practical teaching. That's why the Buddha. See, the Buddha, after his enlightenment, he could have just. In fact, I think he was inclined to not teach. He'd finished his business. Everything was chill. Everything was okay. There was no problem, just no problem at all. And then he looked around and he thought, partly, he suffered as a young man, as Prince Siddhartha. He had to go through his own struggle to finally, at the age of 35, to realize awakening. But he looked around, and you might know this famous utterance where just people have so much. Well, no, he didn't actually say this. It was actually when, according to the story, one of these high Brahma gods said, there are beings with little dust in their eyes. They would really benefit if you were to teach and to show the way. And so in terms of, again, when I talked about the teaching of the 5 aggregates, it's usually used in relation to other teachings. And you might think, if you think of, say, which I think we're prone to do, especially someone like I think in the West we like linear things. I think, my experience with, say, Thai language, in a sense it's more circular. It's almost more concentric. You go A, B, C, come back to A. And I have literally had Western friends who freaked out by that, like, Why are we back at A? Am I stupid? Is that why you're being back at A? Or did I miss something the first time around? But actually, like, this is, again, it has to do with how knowledge is transmitted. You might know that Thailand is very much still, to this day, like a tradition that is rooted in oral transmission. That is how knowledge has generally, up till today. I mean, now we have people on their phones all watching TikTok, which is, you could say, you know, there are little captions and there's words there, but I wouldn't really call that a transmission of great knowledge. In fact, you know, it can be quite, you know, it's exciting, it's diversion, it's an entertainment, but if you think about, like, traditionally, if you were a little kid, your parents went out, especially if it's an agrarian part of the society, part of the country, they went out into the rice paddies. And then they'd like, okay, you hang out with Granny. And what would Granny do? She'd take you to the monastery. And then you'd sit there and you just listen to these monks talking. And it was quite nice. It was actually is quite a nice way to learn. Slowly, you know, the monks are often telling stories, and so it's a form of oral transmission. But in the West, we kind of, especially like what I've learned doing translation, what is English composition? Yeah, you got to kind of have a premise and the A, B, C, D, and the conclusion, and we love that stuff. You know, it's like from point A to, you know, A to Z, and you kind of have to have like a straight line, not too much meandering, unless you're telling, you know, this is like Little Red Riding Hood or something. Then, you know, she goes off and collects flowers in the path, and it's like, okay, but that's just a story, that's just a fairy tale. But if it's talking about like a book, then we'd like linear. And so you might wonder, like, well, wait a second. Actually, it all starts with consciousness, because consciousness here is, it refers to sense consciousness, to the arising from every moment to moment through the sense doors, our 6 senses. So there's the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. Did I miss anyone? Okay, that's 6, right? Sometimes the 5 are kind of set aside because, especially in terms of like how we relate to the world, I like blueberry cheesecake. You know, that's tongue consciousness. When that cheesecake hits my tongue, I have sukha vedana immediately, happiness, joy. But it starts with consciousness. And as I said, this is the analogy I would use is like this light bulb that is emitting light looks like a unit, like a thing. Now, it's true, the glass and the filament are things, but the actual light, from what I understand, I don't know if anyone understands it, but is like this stream of energy, like of electrons, or basically a current that allows for this light, this bulb to emit light. And that's similar to consciousness. It's a stream. And this is why one way to, say, describe human existence, or even, say, rebirth, if you want to go there, is it's sometimes called the conscious continuum, which I like. It's kind of a neat term, which is a stream of consciousness. So we hear, like even now, all our senses are alert. Like some of you might be feeling a little bit of ache in the body. You know, you might feel your knees, you might feel your spine. Okay, that's very much that's the body here as the touch, the sensation. You're hearing my voice. You see me, or you see other visual forms, and generally speaking, like the eye and the ear are kind of our most important ways of communicating with the world. We're not, like I did smell something at the beginning, like someone maybe a bit sweaty or something, like that occurred to my, like I registered smell, that's a good smell. But basically, since then I haven't, hasn't been anything. Oh yeah, maybe some incense, maybe. I just, it's like very kind of like in the background, so as I said, sometimes the 5 senses are like grouped together as distinguished from the mind, because the mind we're talking here the Pali would be mano and again Dhamma, that say having a thought. The fact that we are able to register a thought is because there's a mind base. So there are these 5 sense bases, or these 6 sense bases, and these 6 sense objects. And when they come together, it's called contact. And so you have the sense base, the sense object, contact, and what happens? Consciousness. That's consciousness. And that arises and ceases. And then the next moment of consciousness arises. So you think, well, why is Vijnana at the end of the 5 when actually it's kind of at the beginning? And the reason being is because, at least this is how it was taught to me, is that how many of you have heard of the teaching called dependent origination? Okay, a few of you. It's very important, but also very profound, and you could say a difficult teaching. I mean, basically, the Buddha says, look, if you understand that, you're on your way. You've finished. You're kind of like finished. You've done it. It's that hard. In fact, you might know there is a monk called Ananda who is his attendant and beloved by many. And Ananda once came to the Buddha, I understand it. And the Buddha said, no, you don't. And Ananda didn't get offended. It's like, okay, I'll work on it some more. If you look on the teaching of dependent origination, which there are these 12 links that explain, for one thing, like there's this monk in California named Ajahn Taniswaran. He uses this. He takes the word self and he turns it into a verb, which I really like. So he talks about selfing, like we're always selfing. We're creating a sense of self and solidifying, consolidating, defending, protecting the sense of self, and that's a process, and that's why he makes it into a verb. And so in these 12 links, it starts with, again, it's circular, but for the purpose of, for practical purposes, it starts with the factor of avijja, which is ignorance, delusion, ignorance, not understanding the nature of reality. What happens when there's avijja in the mind? Well, the next factor is sankhara, and then the next factor is vijnana. And so there, you could say, okay, the roles are reversed. Instead of vijnana, which is like in the easy way of describing, I see something, and then there's a feeling. Like for this bottle, basically it's neutral. I don't really have any particular liking or disliking. In terms of Vedana, there isn't, I would say it's a neutral feeling. And then the perception, okay, it's a bottle, a plastic bottle. And then I start thinking, oh, I might have microplastics in it. And that's the sankharas are proliferating over the thing I've just perceived. But in the 5 khandhas, you have the vijnana at the end. And so if you look at it, say, from the angle, from the perspective of dependent origination, is a really important teaching that we all, like there's so much sense data that we are subject to, but we only we filter it out dependent on our likes and our dislikes, on our the way our minds, the things we're inclined to or disinclined. So one example, say in this chapter on the chapter 1 in Buddha Dhamma, Prapayutta talks about like there's a tree out in the middle of a field, and it's a mango tree, and all the leaves have fallen off, but there's maybe 6 mangoes there. And then there are these 5 different individuals who come across the tree. Now one is herding some cattle and is looking for some shade. And so he'll see the tree, no shade, and be disappointed. Then there'll be someone who's kind of like really hungry, like almost on the point of starvation, and sees the 5 mangoes, and what does he see? He doesn't look at the leaves, he sees the mangoes, and so, and another one who is maybe being chased by a tiger and can climb the tree. Oh, that's great, there's some branches. So this is an example of how sankharas, the way the mental constructs or the mental formations, we then select what we're conscious of. Now this sounds a little bit perhaps complicated, but I think it's a really important point that, like I'm a bird watcher. I'm crazy about birds. So I can remember years ago seeing a snowy owl in Connecticut, migrating down from Canada. I can remember taking a monk on a trip 2 years ago to Kauai, and I saw a hoopoe. So my mind is constantly alert to fluttering, feathery creatures. I just love them. And so it's like I'm receptive to birds. Now someone else might be trees, it might be buildings, like if you're an architect, oh wow. And then you're with someone and they're like, did you see that roof? No, I mean, like, it was in my field of vision, but it just didn't register because roofs just don't do it for me. It doesn't, there's no, and so that this is, say, a reason why, I believe why in the 5 khandhas, consciousness is at the end, because it's referring to this other teaching. Whereas the way you could say it would normally be, if it's just a linear process, then it always starts with consciousness, because the other factors cannot arise without consciousness. There can be no Vedana, there can be no perception, there can be no thought processes having to do with sense contact if there wasn't the contact and the vijnana, the consciousness arising. And so intuitively I would say, why isn't it like rupa, vijnana, sanya, no, rupa, vijnana, vedana, sanya, sankhara. Why isn't it like that? Well, this is just an example of how the Buddhist teachings are this wonderful, it's a vehicle, it's a vessel, it's a raft to take us to the other shore, and but it's elaborate, and I'm not saying you have to understand all of the Tripitaka in order to be enlightened, because that's a tall order. Sometimes you just need one teaching, like just don't attach to anything. Don't in the sense, don't cling to anything. That'll take you almost all the way. That single teaching. But having said that, it's also very helpful, I think, depending partly on your disposition, our disposition, to study, to have, like in the teachings, it talks about pariyati, patibati, pativeda, that we begin by listening. Like even now, you are learning. I think none of you would have come if you felt you had it all sorted out. Like you came, you thought maybe Robin has something to say that is of value and that I can take home with me and be of benefit. And so that's learning. That's what's called pariyati. The next is where you apply it. So what you have learned, then you apply it to your daily life, and right, you make effort, you pay attention, you whatever the field is. It can be just simply like in the training. It starts usually with sila, just being a decent human being, not being a jerk, not harming other creatures. That's a great place to start, and but that's application. That takes effort. That takes attention, and then Pativeda is literally penetration, which means awakening, really gaining insight into the nature of reality, where you could say we're then able to pull the veil and right. I didn't see. It was always there in front of my eyes, but we have all these weird lenses that we see the world through, especially through our likes and dislikes, our preferences and aversions. So, yeah, I'm prone to talking too much. There's lots of material. I always have these cue notes in case I panic. Or do you ever give public talks and the mind goes blank all of a sudden? It's like, or the train of thought, like all of a sudden you're sitting in the caboose and the train has gone somewhere else, and you don't realize, you don't know, like, oh dear, what was I just trying to say? Anyway, there's a lot more, of course, but I always, in these evenings, really appreciate hearing what you have to say and hearing about your experiences in walking. Even if you're Buddhist, then I would say, like, what's it like? What's your path like? What are you experiencing? If you're not a Buddhist, just generally, like, what's life like? Like last time, I talked about assisted dying. That was an interesting discussion where people contributed really interesting. Like one woman, I think she was a specialist on suicide and had this data of like people jumping off bridges and surviving, and telling the story that halfway down they're like, oh shoot, bring me back up. I made a mistake. I just read recently. I have this little. I do use social media, and there's this one. I think it's called historical, something about history. It's a little snippet with a photograph, and it's about this man. He jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge, and he would have died except a sea lion kept like bothering him up, so he wouldn't drown, and he survived. And now he wears this T-shirt. It's like he's part of this. He's started this foundation, like something like live another day or something like live till tomorrow. Anyway, so I'd like to open up the floor, so to speak, to anyone here who has questions, and I'll let Rian decide who gets to speak. Yeah, please give me your name yeah, thank you.
For being here. I'm David Cuban.
David, yeah, hi.
Yeah, thank you. These books that you're translating, who are they for? What's the audience? Is this something that I'm going to pick up and sit down for a year and get through the first one, or?
Yeah, I hope so. I don't, not that I get any royalties. It's not for money. But yeah, I mean, they're for you. I mean, this particular book is quite, it's a deep dive you know, it's like, I was talking, my friend Kurt, we were monks together, and he's visiting from Switzerland, and there's this book, like we're talking like Buddhist books, there's so much available, and it can be a bit confusing. It's a little bit like toothpaste, you know, or toothbrushes, like which one actually works, soft, hard, medium, and you know, sometimes like I walk out of the store because I'm like dizzy with all the choices, and Buddhist books nowadays is a bit like that. So I was telling Kurt that there's this book that's now 50, 60 years old. I think it was written in the 50s by a Sri Lankan monk, but his English was impeccable, called What the Buddha Taught. And his name is Walpola Rahula. And for me, that's still my favorite Buddhist book in the sense of an introduction. But it's a small one. It's maybe, I don't know, perhaps 120 pages or something. But this Buddha Dhamma is 1,500. And so you could say it's like, that first one is like high school, and this is maybe college or university. But don't be intimidated. Like, and it also very much depends on you as an individual. Like, there are some people who need, it's like a nourishment for the mind. They need to read or to discuss, and to it's energizing, and it, like, there are many ways to be enlightened, and one of them is like to be a good Dhamma teacher. Like, even now, while I'm saying these words to you, I have to, in a sense, rehearse or at least review them in my mind. That can lead to moments of, oh yeah, right. Even I, you know, surprise myself like that. I didn't think of it that way. So yeah, and this book, there's now a free online edition, beautifully done in terms of aesthetically, the font, and so it's really up to you whether, you know, where are you at, and it's also a book you don't have to read it from cover to cover. There are these different chapters, so you might say, oh, I want to learn more about the 3 characteristics, or I want to learn more about karma, or I want to learn more about dependent origination. These are all individual chapters, and it's so you can go and dive into or explore one of these chapters. So yeah, but yeah, my feeling, I mean, I can't be objective because I translated the book and I just adore the author. I mean, when I first met him, he gave a talk on sukha, on happiness, and how important happiness is in our practice, and there were tears streaming down my eyes. So I'm a disciple, and so I think his book is the best thing that's ever been written since, you know, the Visuddhimagga in the 5th century. But don't take it from me, because, you know, I really can't be objective. But I think there's something in there probably for everyone who really wants to explore in more detail or more length. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
It's interesting that you mentioned what the Buddha thought, because next week we have again a Dhamma circle, which we do once a month.
Okay.
And actually, that's exactly the book that we are reading. And we're
Good
almost
choice.
at the end of the book, so maybe we should continue with the Buddha Dhamma. that will give us 10 years to go.
10 years later, yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to share.
Sorry. Andy was first.
Oh, sorry.
You're next.
Hello. I was hoping you
Andy.
might clarify my confusion on this subject
Yeah.
in 2 ways. The first way is the chronology.
Uh-huh.
I haven't read very deeply about this subject previously, but I've read 1 or 2 things. And the impression I got that this 5 aggregates or skandha, whatever you call it, was a very specific teaching by the Buddha shortly after the Four Noble Truths. Is that correct or not?
I honestly don't know. It's interesting that you say that, because, you know, earlier I was talking about predicate. Like, where do we start? Like, Papayuto, we got to start with the 5 khandhas, because basically, like, what makes up a human being? Okay, so he didn't start with the Four Noble Truths. That actually comes near the end of the book. And early, I have a Bible at home because my stepfather is a theologian and gave it to me way back when. And I've tried. I'm still working my way through the New Testament. But I just wanted to remember, like, what are the first words? Like in the Bible, it starts with Genesis, right? And so you kind of, what is the predicate? So the predicate is, in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth. So that's where you start, we'll just take that. Let's go from there. It's different in Buddhism in the sense that, as I was saying, you have these three baskets, you have the Pali Canon, 45 volumes. Generally, the Vinaya is at the beginning, and what's interesting is I can't remember whether it's the first volume, because the Pali Text Society in London will have a different order of the books than in Thai. But there's a beautiful, you could say, biography in the beginning of one of these Vinaya books where it starts with the Buddha under the Bodhi tree. And it's basically quite a lengthy description of his awakening. And so it's a really good question, and I can't answer, like, where, like in that account, if you were just to take that story, do the five khandhas appear at all? Where, as I said, it's a key teaching, it's a pivotal teaching, and you'll find it throughout the Pali Canon in numerous places.
I recall seeing it in Thich Nhat Hanh's book, White Clouds,
Uh-huh.
which is, as you know, is a biography of Buddha. Second question.
Okay.
It's been my understanding, which could well be wrong, that the main point of the five aggregates was to highlight the impossibility of self.
Beautifully. I'm glad you said that, because that's actually the very last bit of my talk here, the last paragraph. And because in each of these chapters that Prabhupada, it's always at the end, he'll say, like, what is the practical application of this teaching? And in that chapter, he says, the five khandhas, the practical application is to highlight anatta, not self. Because if you think about, look, we're all just these bundles of energy, whether it's the body or the mind, it's all just energy, and there's no one home in a sense. There's no thing here. There's nothing that is, even from moment to moment, that is the same, and that is, and that's the profundity. So in a way, that's also a paradox, or however you want to describe it. It's like it's one of the most profound teachings. Why introduce it? Well, the reason is because it's useful to say, okay, you have the mind and the body, and the mind has these qualities or these properties, but if you really understand the five khandhas, you understand anatta, as you say. So I'm very glad you mentioned that.
I just wanted to share that about a month ago, I went to a Dankarito's temple and attempted to download the English version of Buddha Dhamma for my 3 American friends. It was impossible to find the link. All the links were broken. If you were to go on the main temple's website and go to like all the selection, there will be like hints of links of the English version, but it's not there. If you go there, there's error 404, and there's one link posted on the temple's Facebook post years ago. That link is also broken. A lot of books there have like options between English and Thai, this book. But if you go to the English for that particular book, it's not there. The only way to acquire it is to go to like some, I think it was like some Thai consulate's website or like Ministry of Health or
Oh, yeah.
The temple itself does not have the, hard copy anymore. So that's kind of something I want to put out there because everyone is like, it's in English and it's everywhere. It's actually quite hard to find.
I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'll contact the monks there and ask them, like, why is this not? I mean, it's a website, and it's if I gave you the link, you could access it just right away. It's there, and it's just that I think one of the reasons there's been a problem is because of copyright issues, like the man who actually sponsored the translation. He was, what's the right word? Eccentric, difficult. I'm trying to say this kindly, but he didn't make it easy. Like he almost had a worry that people were going to steal the artwork that's part of the book and all kinds of. Anyway, sadly, he passed away a year ago. But again, I don't rejoice at anyone's passing necessarily, but the silver lining is that now it's much easier to share the book because he's not protecting it like he allowed for a while. It's what, Yanoesaka one where you were? Yeah, for them to have like it was a PDF. So it was like a photographic image of the book. I mean, you couldn't search. You couldn't. It was really impractical. And then he had financial problems, and so Prapayuto asked that it be removed from the What Yanoesaka One website. So there's been since, but for the last probably 3 years now, I mean, I don't know if there's some way. I mean, like I could give it to Rian or someone, or
I was going to ask you if you send me the link, we'll make sure that it will be available.
Okay. So do you have access to the Little Bang website or to?
I finally found my own copy through like Maneuver to other websites, like a consulate website or something. But I just wanted to tell people.
Yeah, this is a I'm pretty sure it's a GitHub link or website, and so but it's really just you click and the whole book's right there, and it's so easy to navigate. Like I said, there's this Hungarian monk in Portugal who's just spent months of doing this, and it's such a great offering that and so it's there. It's just a matter of knowing what to click, and then it's right there in front of your eyes. And there's a print on demand too. So it used to be sold at Asia Books and Kinokuniya. I don't think it is anymore. I think it's partly because even now that we're in this, I'm not really part of it, only peripherally, of like who owns the copyright now that he died. Like his sons, there's a foundation. So we're kind of like, because there are people who want to use the English to translate it into German and into Chinese, and who owns the copyright? So it's still a little bit in limbo, but the English website, I mean, I'm just, like I said, I just love this book, and I just love how it's been done, this website. The print on demand is expensive because it's only printed in America and then shipped out. And even there it's expensive because you're just ordering one book. And it's a company called Blurb. And it does, and it comes as these 7 volumes, very readable, because the one big book, it's not like an armchair book. It's so heavy,
My version has like an outlined essential version, and an expanded version, and then detailed version.
Yeah,
Maybe that's your project.
maybe next project. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. So, out of all the things you've translated, maybe particularly in this book, are there any surprising things that would like surprise people who are know the basics of Buddhism?
Who know the basis?
Yeah, but will be surprised to know.
Well, again, it's really hard to be objective. I just adore Prapayuto. I think he's a genius. I think he has a photographic memory. If you ask him, like, he'll say, on this volume, on this page, it says this in Pali. He has this incredible ability. But more than that, I mean, he's he walks the talk. You meet him, and he's just emanating kindness, compassion. He's not just some people will be critical. He's just this orthodox Theravadan monk, and it's just in his, he's in his head. No, he's much more than that. But go back to your question. Yeah, he surprises me all the time, and he keeps writing. In fact, I spent like 5 weeks translating about 7 pages that he's just added to this chapter. And there's something, I call it a depth charge, where all of a sudden, kind of like you're in your little submarine, happy, and then like, boom, he says something that's like, blows my mind. And so in this case, I'm going to give you an example. Like I was talking about how Chaitana, intention, throughout the book he says like, Chaitana is at the vanguard. It's always at the forefront of these sankharas, and it always relies on. And then he talks about, well, actually, if wisdom is established in your mind, what is happening, even though Chaitana is at the forefront, it's getting, in a sense, contaminated by other things in your mind, other constructs, biases, defilements, whatever you want to call them. And so even though it's kind of leading the charge, it's kind of being bullied to go in a particular. And he said once wisdom really is established, it's like Chaitana kind of, what is he? It's like, what's the expression? I'm trying to remember how I translate it into English. It's not like defanged, but because it's not something that's negative, but it's no longer. It's like the servant to wisdom. And then, instead of you producing karma, he talks about like for an arhat, a perfectly awakened being, you don't use the word karma anymore. You use this other word, kirya, where it's like just pure doing. It can never be. Their actions, whether it's mental, verbal, or physical, can never be affected by greed, hatred, and delusion. So that's just an example. Like, I was like, my jaw dropped, and like, yeah, that's kind of one of the missing pieces of the puzzle. So it happens all the time. Anyway, not everyone. I get so much of a buzz, I get blissed out working with. It's like. I can have like sleep. I have all kinds of physical problems, but when I do this, it's I forget it all drops away, and my mind goes into this very peaceful, happy place that I think is also very healthy. But that's that's individual. Yeah, thank you.
Robin, thank you very much.
Ian.
I think I was not far off the mark to say that you always give excellent speeches.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and taking the opportunity, I look forward to having you again somewhere next year. And thank you all for being here, asking your questions, and helping each other going forward on the path, or going in circles around in the path.
Yeah.
Next week, last chance for this year, where we're going to discuss the book that was mentioned by Robin almost at the end. And perhaps we will continue doing with the Buddha Dhamma. For now, as always, please help us clean up the room, where the brown seats and cushions go to the balcony, the white seats go behind the curtain in the room outside. There you'll also find the donation boxes. If you want to show your appreciation for the talk, there's one for the teacher, Robin, and the other one is for the Marie Foundation. To make life easier for the people who have to count the money and give it to the right direction, please first put money in the box if you would like to do so, and then have a nice chat with other people. And hope to see you next week again.
Can I just say something? There's a tradition here, the organizer of the sort of social after session, coffee session, is not here today, but maybe some of us could organize it, maybe Chris or Dan or someone could organize it, because that's a tradition here at Bonnery, that they go to a coffee shop, as he puts it, to carry on the conversation.
Right. We're also a group of friends, not only in the Dhamma, but also over